stories turn songs into symphonies, events into memories, and lives into legends. In our crowded world, knowing your story cuts through the noise so you can make your mark, whether you want to sell more books, increase profits, or just make a difference. At Sterling & Stone, story is our business. The Story Studio podcast is where we explore ways we can all tell our stories better. And now, with the Story Studio podcast number 3, here's Johnny, Sean, and Dave.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Today we're going to talk about what we learned publishing over 100 books. Just because these are the early episodes, I want to kind of get in the habit of doing this at least a little bit. I am your host. I'm Johnny B. Truant, and the other two gentlemen are, introduce yourselves quickly, guys, for those of you who are new.
I'm Sean. If you're watching this, I'm the one with the nose.
I am David, and I'm the one with
rage.
With
the rage. No, you're the one with the rage.
The rage. In spite of my rage, I'm still just a...
The one with the rage, wasn't that a Friends episode? I feel like there was a one with a rage.
I think that's one where Ross killed everybody.
Yeah. That was the one with Ben Stiller.
Yes.
Bad ducky.
That's a bad duck. Yeah. So anyway, today we're going to talk about what we learned publishing more than 100 books. We have, I was trying to figure this out this morning. Depending on how you count, we've done at least 100 books, but there's been a lot of published titles. It's well
with
over
releases.
Books.
It's twice that at least.
But it's a lot of books, and we have
actually, if you count the Lexi stuff in the early days, it's a lot more than that, right? We've had a lot of releases.
I think we published 5,000 books.
It's possible that is a possible number.
So anyway, and we've had the self-publishing podcast for almost 6 years before this, and so we've been around a lot of people that have published books themselves. So it's something we know about. So key to begin with, very first thing that we've learned. Anybody want to take what's the best inaugural topic that we've learned?
Oh, I got one.
Beyond?
I got one for sure because it will frame all of the other things that we talk about.
Okay,
which is. There are always... Actually, can I do two to start? Because...
Why not? Hey, everybody who's new, get used to Sean talking more.
Well, it's okay. I have to account for Dave. Dave is... it's a fact. Dave is going to talk less.
Why don't you consolidate them and just take your top 10 and make it 1 with 10 sub-goals?
There is a vacuum, a void, and Sean must fill it.
Yes.
For those of you new to the show, Johnny was making fun of me because that's how I do our end of year lists. When I'm putting goals for the company and I can't fit them into 10, they all have sub goals. So the first one is that there are always exceptions to the rules. Always, always, always. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that, hey, here's what we've kind of figured out. Here's what works for us. And there are a handful of people who are doing the opposite of that thing very, very successfully. But we tend to focus on the things that you can look for patterns and copy. So on the Stone Table, our little mastermind, we have a little show kind of, I guess, that we do called Stealing from Billions. And the idea is to pull commercial concepts from Hollywood properties and best-selling books and things like that. What are they doing that we can kind of crib from and understand what they're doing and why, so that we could put it over in this context. And those are general rules. Those work for a lot of people. And there are people who defy all of those rules and are still just killing it. But we wouldn't want to copy what they're doing, because on anybody's strategy, you can't see the intricacies. You can't see... I mean, there may be somebody who's doing some crazy thing with their story structure and with their characters, and they don't have a list, and they're doing it all on Facebook, and they're still crushing it. And if you go try and copy that, you're probably going to flounder, because there's just too many things that you can't see. The other thing is know your why. On all of this stuff, know your why. That has become so important to our company that it's a drinking game. It's funny, but you have to know your why, because if you're making a series of decisions for the wrong reasons, you can really find yourself lost in the woods, and you're writing the wrong thing. You're serving the wrong audience. You're just altogether in the wrong space. So knowing your why is really, really important.
I would add to know your why, frame your expectations appropriately. This is really important because we tend to notice just in anything, you know, it's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like that you notice the things that are there to be noticed, which means that we hear the stories of the very successful authors. You know, they're on the podcasts like ours used to be, and I guess like it currently is, depending on certain circumstances, on the other self-publishing podcasts or any publishing podcasts, stories that you run across, people that you talk to. You're going to hear about people saying, oh, I did this amazing thing and I have all these books. And it's real easy to think that you are atypical and that you're a problem. Like what you're doing is wrong, and that what they're doing is right somehow, and that you should be doing as well as they're doing. And that's always a mistake. I wish I had the stats, but most indie authors...
You can make them up.
I can make them up. 47.5% of stats are made up. I wish I had the stats that said, I'm betting most people who indie publish books, even in like regularly, like producing content, don't do nearly as well as what we tend to think by looking at the
average sale is $200. I mean, not sale. Sorry.
Wow.
The average indie book makes $200. So I mean,
it's lifetime.
Right, total. And that includes the blockbusters. And that's the thing that it's easy to get lost in the whole indie publishing thing is, okay, well, if we're indie publishing, we're in charge. We don't need a publisher. We could just go do it. Well, yeah, but Amazon is not just like an unlimited free traffic source. You're not getting all that traffic. The discoverability isn't just built into the magical publish button. You have to send traffic. You have to send targeted traffic. And if you're not sending targeted traffic, then targeted traffic has to find your books because it's algorithmically in alignment with other books that those readers are going to like. It's not magic. It's math.
This is not a get rich quick thing. I think that I'm preaching to the choir at this point. It's hard to imagine anybody, certainly from our self-publishing podcast audience, who would ever still think this. But there is a cadre of folks out there who Dave, I'm sure, has wonderful things to say about, who would have you believe that this is you turn a crank. Oh my God, you can be a bestseller too, like me. And I'm, no, that's not. If there are better ways to get rich quick. Basically, don't make this your way. And to play off of what Sean said before about copying somebody's, like they did this, they have everything's on Facebook. You can't copy people's strategies wholesale. You can't copy people's tactics wholesale, which is another oldie but goodie topic for those of us who've been listening for a while, which is pay attention to strategies, not tactics. Don't say, what specifically is this other author doing? Say, why are they doing what they're doing, and how can I apply it to what I'm doing? You embrace the strategy, not the specific thing that they're doing.
Yeah. On that note, I would say that there's a really big difference between long-term thinking and short-term thinking, and you should know what that difference is and really lean into it. And this goes right back to knowing your why, because if you're writing as a hobby, totally different set of criteria than if you're writing as a long-term career. If you're writing to exit your job, that's different than if you're writing to sustain your career. You need to know what you're doing, because only then can you kind of reverse engineer the steps you need to get there. And for us in Sterling and Stone, we tend to by default always think long term in terms of 1, 3, 5, 10 years. I mean, genuinely, we have some goals out there that are 10-year goals and a lot of 5-year goals. And now going into this year, a lot of 2-year goals. And so those sometimes, in fact, oftentimes are in direct conflict with short-term goals. And like the second half of last year, there was a stretch where we had to make a bunch of short-term goals. It's just where we were as a company. And, we recognize that's where we were, and we need to escape and get out of there as fast as you can, because it's not a comfortable place to be for us where we are such long-term thinkers. But it's okay to think short-term if you know why you're doing it and you know what you're trying to get out of that. But always know your why, and know that long-term and short-term thinking are not the same thing. And when you come up with a plan, ask yourself, is this a short-term plan or a long-term plan? Because I would guess that most of us don't actually ask that question. We just kind of come up with a plan and go with it. And it might actually be at odds with our true intentions.
I saw Dave hovering over there when I was mentioning, people who might tell you that you can get rich quick. So I wasn't sure if I stepped on Dave in any way in that one.
I think I was going to make a joke, but there's no need to even talk about those.
Do you want to go back and we can retrofit a joke?
Nah.
Fit it in there. This joke, just remember, here was the setup. All right, I will add that it's harder than you think. Now, the unicorns out there, not the unicorns and rainbow sort of unicorns, but in that they are a special case, the exceptions that Sean was talking about. Hearing those stories would have you believe that this is, even if not a get-rich-quick sort of career or a get-rich-slowly career, it's just kind of, it's a job. And it's amazing how hard the average person has to work to kind of keep the figurative lights on with business or with writing. It's usually not a case where you just kind of write something every once in a while and things are always easy. There are ups and downs. There is a long, slow slog for a lot of people. And it's kind of like that metaphor. I know they used it in Fight Club, but I want to say it's something that goes back to like martial arts and Asian, whatever, where the person waits outside the door of the monastery.
The monk, yeah.
Right. And they tell him to go away. And and if they stay out there for 3 days, then eventually they're let in. I feel like that's kind of, when I'm talking to people about writing, I kind of have that mentality that this isn't something that you should enter into as a fluke. And if you're in it, you need to understand that you have entered into something that is hard.
Well, the beginning of Write, Publish, Repeat is like 10 pages of why you should just leave now, right?
I left. I stopped reading right after that.
You did.
A lot of people left bad reviews. Like, why is it taking them so long?
Just for those of you new to the show, Write, Publish, Repeat is our kind of indie publishing handbook written by me and Johnny and Dave, and Dave's never read it. So I
read the part I wrote.
That was really
put
awesome.
All sorts of shit in there that he
I got stuff to do.
Doesn't even know.
I got long-term 2-hour goals to make.
What do you consider long-term thinking, Dave?
Like a week.
That sounds about right.
I can't cry that much in my head. It's very, very small amount of space in here.
What's the longest term you've ever planned?
Filled with crazy. What's that?
What's the longest term planning you've ever done?
I mean, we've done long-term planning for books and stuff.
But do you ever remember it?
What's the longest term planning that ever worked out for you?
I don't know. Yesterday's gone.
Dave doesn't have a great memory, so the number of times that we've fucked with him and put something in his goals list that I don't remember that well, I guess I must have done it.
Dave asked me this year when Dave guessed how old I was.
Fuck you.
So I turned 40 last year, and it was a pretty big deal. We had lots of very grown-up, mature conversations about turning 40 and what that meant to me. And he asks me the year that I turned 40, so how old are you now? I said, I don't know, Dave. Why don't you guess? He thinks about it and he says, 36. So I was even close to 40. Or it was like, oh, maybe I have a bad memory. He turned 40 a couple years ago. None of the conversations we had this year, none of them about turning 40 made an impact on Dave.
So what else have we learned doing 100 books?
I think if you talk about growth, I think this is really important. Then this goes to what you're saying, Johnny, that it's harder than you necessarily think. It's a job, ladies and gentlemen. Like, this is not, I think it's really easy to think of writing. And this is the difference between a career author, somebody who's trying to build this, and a hobbyist. But you've got to think of it as work. I mean, if you can't get your words in, then you've got to be consistent and make the time to do that. If you're trying to write more words, then you have to measure what you're doing so you can see where your slow spots are, where your fast spots are, and try to get better. I mean, any job that you have, hopefully you love that job and you want to get better and better at it. And writing is a job that you're choosing. You're saying, this is what it is worth my time to do this thing. So why wouldn't you want to get better and better and better at it? And not just thinking it's a job. So what are the things I need to do in this job to make more money, to be more successful, to have more readers? Do I need to educate myself on what makes good cover design? Do I need to read the best-selling books, product descriptions, so I can understand that? Like, how do you get better? And it's always been our goal internally to get better by the book. We don't focus on dashboards and numbers, to the company's detriment, actually. Now we actually have Perry, who he's our fiction hacker. We had Tammy before that, and it was their job to look at the dashboards and make sure that we're monetizing correctly so that we can focus on getting better by the book, because our job is reader experience. We want to make sure that when readers read Sterling and Stone books, they're really pleased. That's the most important thing. And so I think it's really easy to just get in the rhythm and you write per book and you write per book. But if you're not intentional about that, you're not getting better, you're plateauing, or you could even get worse. Because let's say that you have a writing tick that you're not getting ironed out and you're not taking the time to get better editors and really look at your reader feedback and all of this stuff, then you're not improving and you think everything's fine. You could be making the same mistakes and more mistakes and just getting worse. So it's not enough to publish over and over and over. And I know that we're in part responsible for the write, publish, repeat, churn that is happening online or, in the bookstores. But it really is about trying to get better, because there will be a market correction at some point, and people who are putting craft and readers first are going to win long term.
I would argue you said putting craft and readers first. I would say putting readers first. Because craft is kind of a squishy concept, because a lot of people, it's kind of the art versus commercial divide, and everybody's idea of art is subjective. So you may say, and this is kind of a point that I would say, this is one of my learning points, is I think there's a tendency with certain types of writers, especially newer writers, or just established writers who are especially art focused, to say, well, my books are really good, but people don't get it.
No one understands me.
Right. Nobody understands my work, and therefore I am successful, but I people are dumb. And if your why, go back to Sean's knowing your why, if your why is you want to make great art, then yes, you are successful. You did great. If your goal is to make a living as a writer, you're probably not, because the reader experience matters the most, whether you feel like, oh, they don't get it or not. If they don't get it, you're not in business. So you do need to treat it like a business that way. But you
need to make readers get it. That's one of the things that I learned as a newspaper reporter. You have to distill very complex narratives into something that the average seventh grader could understand, because a lot of people they have a very narrow knowledge set of what they do, their job, their friends, whatever. They don't understand big, complex things. And when you're writing stories for the newspaper, you had to break it down and make it easy to understand. So if people are stupid, and there are a lot of stupid people out there, you have to make them get it. You have to make them care about your book. You have to make it. I see a lot of like new authors like dumping pages and pages of exposition. They've been building this world forever, and they just hit you over the head and punch you in the face with their world building. And like, I don't care. I don't care about it because you're just hitting me with it. Make me care. Make me understand. So if you think your readers don't get it and they're stupid, it's on you. It's on you. You need to make them get it.
I totally agree with this. And this is like, go back to business writing. You see a lot of company websites with really jargony, just like crappy descriptions. And it's all about them. It's about the company. It's not about the consumer. And that's just bad writing. The best book on this, and whether you're a business writer or not, I think this is a book that any writer would benefit from reading. It's a book, I apologize, I don't remember the author, but the book is called Writing Without Bullshit. And it's very good. It's about writing clean, concise copy. But, even within fiction narratives, this stuff all holds true. It's like, use simple language.
I think Shakespeare wrote that, right?
Right. Shakespeare. Look, what you want to do is not be stupid. What Dave's saying isn't like use words that, like it sounds like a Dick and Jane book, but there's a lot of writers who, especially when they're starting out, they're going to go for the more complex word choice because they feel like
I'm smart. I want everyone to know.
Right. Either they're showing off or they have something to prove. But both of those things are about you, not the reader. And you need to knock that off. Like we cut a lot from our drafts always. Right now, I'm working on something that Johnny and I have been working on for a long time now, actually. And Johnny specifically said before I even started, he's like, dude, I tried to be as get as much in the subtext as time as possible and write as lean as possible. And having said that, take a hatchet to it. Just cut anything that you need to. We want to be lean. And that's true, because if you're just being clumsy with your word count and just trying to, get the words in, which I think more and more writers are doing right now, they're putting a lot of bloat into their work because it gets the page count up, it gets the book done, it gets them to market so they can start on the next one. That's not right. Like,
I can't tell you how many indie books I've seen, like 600, 650 pages. It's like, there's no way this story merits 650 pages.
Yes, right. No, it's true.
It's got to be Kindle Select.
I think there's two things. I think there's page reads, because you'll see a lot longer books in Select, but I think it's more than page read. I think it's momentum. I finished another book, I'm on to the next one. And writing is rewriting. That's on the list of things we learned too. It's rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And we've systematized things at the Stone for sure. But even then, our stuff is still getting 5 or 6 times through the, drafting process before it gets to a reader. And that's important to take that time, because otherwise we're not getting better by the book.
You want to stand out for a reader. Okay, so this is actually, there's a bit of a philosophical divide on this. I could see it going either way. In my opinion, this is in our opinion, in Sterling and Stone's opinion, we would rather stand out for readers. We would rather somebody read our books and say, oh, wow, that was great. And you remember the name of the book and you remember the name of the author. But there is a school of thought, and this isn't right or wrong, but this is what we've felt, that that just getting through and kind of being a commodity. It's kind of the pulp model in the extreme in the ebook version, because it's just like, we wrote the book called Write, Publish, Repeat, but some people are really write, publish, repeat. Don't think about it. Just go, go, go. But that is kind of a churn and burn. And a lot of people get through those books, like the readers who are super voracious. Sometimes they read so many books, they aren't necessarily going to remember you if you don't make an effort to stand out. And that may be to your detriment, because that may be a long-term thing where, something changes in the way that books are delivered or something, and then they don't remember you, or you kind of burn out or something, and you aren't perennial at that point. You were a commodity, and we want to be
also
perennial.
really hard to maintain. We know a lot of authors who they're just in the churn and they wish they could slow down, but they've created this beast where, this is really, really pervasive in the romance space. More so than probably every other genre put together, but I think it's in every genre, but especially in romance, where they have to feed the alligator, and the alligator's hungry. And if they want to go
make the donuts,
right? If they want to go and write a sci-fi series, good luck. If they want to go and write, anything, good luck. They have this audience, and that's what the audience knows them for. And they can't even take the time to go do a pen name and write something else over here, because in the time they build that pen name, this one over here on romance or whatever is dead. And so that's what we mean about being intentional. I'll pop another one in here, which is patience is a virtue in this space. If you think you can do something overnight, you can't, unless you're one of those special unicorns. It does happen. A couple of people have blown up from nowhere, but usually not. Usually it's a very intentional thing, and it's not your first time or your second time or your third time. It's patience. And we always say now, if we were going back in time, then we would not write a book and publish it. We would write a trilogy or a series, and we would be, go to market with something in the bank. And we're actually developing many pen names right now and many lines, and across all of them, that's a common denominator. We're not going to market with anything with just a book, because that's the way you stumble. That's the way you lose reader credibility. The thing in fiction that probably cost us the most money, other than genre hopping, which we'll get to in a second, is mine and Dave's lack of momentum with our own audience and making promises to them that we couldn't fulfill. That's the worst thing you can do with a reader. You have no capital. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to go on to another.
Dave can think of worse things you can do with a reader.
Right. Yes, he definitely could. But the idea that we want to please our readers, and we want to make promises that we can keep, because we still have a lot of diehards who they're just with us through the long haul, because Dave was a pretty lovable fellow despite his grouchiness. But it's not easy to maintain that. And if we had delivered on all of those promises, our imprint would be much, much further along a couple years later. So you want to do things that you can sustain, because burning out is bad. Burning out in front of your readers is way worse.
I'm going to go back to something that Sean actually mentioned a few points ago, sort of as a by the way, and that is the importance of subtext. We can delve in future episodes on sort of what makes a good story. Now, obviously, that's a hot button sort of thing, but hey, this is our podcast, so we get to say what we think makes a great story. But that's something that I didn't get as well at the beginning, and I feel I get better now, and it just continues to be more and more important. If you want a really good read on writing, Robert McKee's book Dialogue is excellent. And it sounds like, oh, well, I'm going to learn about dialogue. No. It's much more than that. I wish he hadn't named it Dialogue.
Yeah, I know we've probably mentioned this book already on this new podcast, and we've mentioned on the old one a bunch, and we've mentioned it privately, and we mentioned it on our group, but that's because it's really good. And nobody's come back and said, man, why'd you make me waste my time reading that book? Right? It's really solid. And it shouldn't be called dialogue. It really should be about how to create,
how to communicate, how this wouldn't make a good book title, but it's about how characters communicate what's in their heads. Basically, it's about communication. It's not about necessarily verbal dialogue, one talking to another. But subtext is, just in a nutshell, it is the meaning beneath the meaning. People seldom say exactly what they mean, even in real life. So if
Dave, do you say what you mean?
Yes. The classic example would be an arguing couple, where it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Well, it's the.
Can they be arguing about the dishwasher?
Yes, it's the how you said it that matters. A cold look can say a lot more than words. The fact that somebody is fidgeting with something while they're talking might indicate nerves. I was actually thinking of that. So this is a really obscure reference, but
I can't wait.
But Sean, do you remember the episode of Shameless when there's somebody in the hospital and Lip is really mad about it? Do you remember that? He's on the phone with Fiona. I don't want to blow something for somebody who hasn't watched Shameless. He's really mad with her, and you just see him on the phone, and like his hand is shaking. And
yeah.
He's giving her really straight answers. Yes, he's better, but the tone of his voice and the way that his hand is shaking a little bit, and you could just tell how pissed off this guy is. And so those sorts of things, the what's unsaid, is way more powerful because that's how people really communicate.
Yeah, the book that we're working on right now, me and Johnny again, is filled with subtext. Like that's the whole point. And the reader really needs to observe all of these behaviors and body language and the things that aren't said. And it is a difficult thing to communicate. And it's something that you always want to be aware of and get better and better by the book, but don't fixate too much on it. Just make it intentional so that you're really observing that in not only your own work, but when you read, when you watch TV, when you go to the movies. Like this is stuff that you really want to assimilate.
I would also, one of the things that I didn't learn this recently, but I articulated it for somebody recently, and it reminded me how important it is. And it's voice. So the idea of voice is basically that you aren't going to sound like anybody else. And usually with art, you imitate first. And I know that like with people who, Dave, maybe you could tell me if you did this. When you started drawing, did you copy other people's stuff that you really liked?
Yeah, very much. When I was like a kid, I would trace coloring books, like Spider-Man coloring books. But then as I started drawing, I definitely like Bill Watterson was in Charles Schultz, sort of that sort of style. And I eventually found my own through that, but I definitely started with that.
When you were crafting that infamous masterpiece of you spending time with my mom, who were you copying? What was your artistic influence?
Why would you bring that up on this show?
I don't know. That sounds like a worst show ever topic.
Sean,
I was just curious.
This is a classy show, Sean.
I was curious.
My point on voice is that there's a real tendency to feel like you aren't doing something right if you aren't doing something the way that you feel it's excellent by somebody else's standards. So like when I started, I was a big Stephen King fan. I still am, but I was imitating a lot of the things that he did. Oh, well, King does it this way. And so there's a tendency to feel like if you do something that feels unique to you, that it's wrong somehow. And Sean, what's the quote with the singer? Is it, I want to say Hank Ketchum, and he said that
Oh, it was Hal Ketchum.
Hal Ketchum.
Yeah, so Hal Ketchum was he's had a couple of solo hits albums, but he's mostly a songwriter for other people. But he never found his voice for, it was like 10 years. He was just writing songs and not getting anywhere because he was trying to be Van Morrison. He was like, I just want to be Van Morrison.
Why would you choose that of all people?
Dude, Van Morrison's dope. What's your problem with Van Morrison? So he just wanted to be Van Morrison and he couldn't be Van Morrison. And so finally he's like, well, I realize I'm not going to be Van Morrison. I may as well try and be, Hal Ketchum. And that's when he started selling songs and getting a name. Because
the funny thing is, his voice was exactly like Elmo's.
But
Elmo loves a brown-eyed girl.
Hey,
well, it
Dave,
wasn't as good as your mom joke, but go ahead.
Do you want us to edit that one out?
Continue.
But the idea is that you need to understand that you will develop a unique voice. You are going to sound different. That's a sign of doing things right, not a sign that you need to adapt and become something else. There's something really unique about you that will attract your ideal readers, and you shouldn't be trying to attract necessarily other people's ideal readers that's more of a developmental thing that you'll grow into that.
I have the market is constantly changing and will continue to do so. And this is a few pieces to this first. So Chris Fox at our summit a couple of years ago asked the audience, or last year, asked the audience, where do you think we are in, the self-publishing journey? Are we in the early adopter phase or are we at the end? And I was really happy to see many, many people in that audience raise their hands for we're in the early adopter phase. We are absolutely in the early adopter phase. Now, I think that line is changing. That's why we're not the self-publishing podcast anymore. We are the Story Studio podcast, because the indie, the self-publishing, that's just going away. It is publishing. But the publishing market itself is changing. It's evolving, and it's going to constantly do so. We're going to roll and roll and roll. It's very difficult to extrapolate and think, what's it going to be like 5 years from now, let alone 10 years? That's a really long way. So people who are in this game for the long haul and are there to see all these changes, that's just going to be amazing.
One of the things I had was appreciating where you are in your journey. I think
yes.
When you're starting out, you don't have a lot of the attention, so you have the chance to experiment more and to fail more and kind of find your voice. And I think one thing that could happen, that could harm you potentially, is if you get successful before you're ready to be successful. Especially if you have a hit series, which was a one-off that you didn't even plan to do. And then that's you now. That's how you are defined. And anything that you want to do to deviate away from that might be met with resistance from the audience. So I think, it's easy to say, don't worry about, money coming in and stuff like that, because we all want to make a living doing this. So obviously I'm not saying that, but don't stress out so much. Try to enjoy where you're at and learn while you're doing it, and not think too much about what other people are doing, and focus on what you are doing, and learning from the people that review your stuff, learning from your beta readers if you have them.
I knew it. I knew we were going to stumble over each other. You go, Sean.
Well, okay. I think this one is this is the Dave is right one. Dave is right-ish. So genre hopping is a lot of work.
Dave was right-ish.
Now, I don't think I think genre hopping is a personal choice. Now, it certainly cost us a lot of money to genre hop, and if we were, if
genre hopping meaning writing in various genres under the same name.
Right. So, Johnny and I are terrible at this. We've written fantasy, Western fantasy, sci-fi.
And these were our first books. It's not like we eventually got to them.
Right. Dark fantasy, comedy, women's fiction, thrillers, all sci-fi thrillers all over the place.
Wait. I wasn't looking. Did you put comedy in air quotes?
No, I did not. That shit's funny, dude. Adult video, funny as shit. All right. So we've written all over the place, but that hasn't served our bottom line. Now, what it has served is the fact that I feel confident I could write just about any story in any genre. I love that feeling, and I actually wouldn't trade more revenue for that. But I know my why. I want to be a storyteller. I want to, practice my skills in every single arena. And I was lucky enough to get a co-author like Johnny, who was like, all right, let's play. Now it's 5 years later and we're not as interested in playing now. We've kind of figured it out and we're dialed in, and we know, or we're very intentional about our projects. But for 5 years, just having the playground of the different genres was really good for me. I think Johnny would agree. It was really good for him as a storyteller, and I don't think he would change that. But now we know we're very intentional. So we're still genre hopping, but we're doing it with specific targeted pen names, bringing other writers into our insanity and letting them play in the sandbox and just being intentional. So it's not that genre hopping is right or wrong or good or bad or any of that. It's a personal decision. What are you willing to do? Because do you know it's going to be harder? Yes, I think we can all agree, 100% of us, that whether you can do it or not is not the question. It is going to be harder. And for us, it was worth it, but now we're smarter about how we do it.
I also want to say, there are a lot of authors out there that are churning and burning and, putting out stuff there. And it's doing very well for them, and that's fine. We're not criticizing them. That is an option. That is something you may want to do. That could, if you make enough money putting out something like that, then you could put yourself in a position to take the time to do something that you want to do. But as Sean said, be intentional with that. Actually plan for that. Unless you enjoy that. I mean, if you enjoy writing pulp stuff and fast and furious, then awesome. Live it, enjoy. But if you want to do something different, plan it, make it intentional, do it on the side, like a side job, perhaps. Definitely, we're not criticizing people that are doing that, because obviously, I think it's easy to piss all over something. Oh, that sucks. But if a lot of people are reading something, I don't think anybody could say it sucks. It might suck for you.
Right. I totally agree with that. There's a lot of stuff where it's very successful and it doesn't resonate with me, but I think it's pretty immature to say that sucks, and I don't understand why anybody likes that.
The clearest example of this was 50 Shades of Grey. Like when it was blowing up, people were like, it's terrible.
That is a terribly written book. But you know what it gets? It gets so Cindy and I just saw 3 billboards, outside Ebbing, Missouri on date night a couple of nights ago. And the 50 Shades Free trailer comes on. And and we've seen this trailer now 38 times. Like, it's every time we go to the movies, this trailer comes on. And it's so hilarious because that trailer, I mean, just go Google it if you haven't seen it. The 50 Shades Free trailer. It is lady porn. And I don't mean like, because there's like hot dudes like with bare chests. It's not like that. It's like every line of dialogue. I bought this for you. I should have asked your permission first. It's like every line is like,
I keep trying those in my personal life and they never land.
So, it's just like,
if I said that to my wife, she might walk away.
It's really, really hilarious. The clothes, the cars, there's enough there to appeal to the guys who have to take the girls to see this movie on Valentine's Day. It is really funny.
There should just be a slide at the end that said, bring her because then you'll get laid. Like, that would just satisfy the dudes. They'd be happy.
Well, that would have accomplished the same thing. Yes. But it's no. That's all.
Were you going to do another one? I had a.
Yeah, I was going to have one that I think is interesting, which is publishing on Amazon specifically. This doesn't hold true for Kobo, Barnes and Noble, Apple, which are more merchandised. But publishing on Amazon is very much like SEO. It's search based and it's quirky and it's algorithms, and you can kind of game it, which is unfortunate, but the algorithms there are just a little bit behind Google. Google's algorithms are a little more sophisticated and they're not purchase based. So Amazon is actually the 3rd largest search engine in the world, right behind YouTube and Google, but it's the largest search engine in the world for buyers. So it's naturally, of course, it's a lot like SEO. Now, same as Google, not to get too in the weeds or boring here, but a few years ago, there was something called the Panda update that just obliterated
They updated a shitload of pandas.
There was they updated the way the algorithms behaved, and a bunch of search engine based businesses were just out of business overnight. And something very similar will happen in our space, where Amazon does a major sweep, and a lot of people who have kind of penny stock style books are just going to lose their businesses overnight. So it is really interesting to see the parallels between search engine optimization and the book market on Amazon, and kind of anticipate where that's going to go.
Assets are forever, with some obviously notable exceptions. Dave, were you going to chime in to say that diamonds were forever? I saw a little perk up there. Thought maybe that was coming. Okay. But assets are forever. So it's very natural for you to put out a book, a series of books or something, and then it's like launch and there's a spike of some sort, whether it's large or small, depends on who you are. And then you kind of like relegate that to the backlist, and you go and you write next book. But what actually is true is that any reader who hasn't come across your particular book is a potential new sale if they're into that kind of book. And so I wrote, back in 2012, I wrote a book called Fat Vampire, and it was a 6-book series, and I finished it years ago. And it just kind of like, I was done with that, and I was thinking about new things, and I've 100 plus books. And then we had somebody who was working for us last year named Tammy, who revitalized that series. She found the right combination of whatever juju went into it, and it started doing really well. And it's still continuing to do pretty well relative to what it used to do, which was in the dumps. And anybody who comes across that series who hasn't run across it before, it's like they don't know that you wrote it a long time ago. They don't care that you wrote it a long time ago. I was looking at something the other day, some top 10 list, and I think it was to see where Fat Vampire was, and it was like this upstart named Stephen King wrote a book called Salem's Lot that continues to outrank my books. Go figure. He wrote that in like 1977 or something. So, and especially if you can update titles or descriptions or anything like that to look more contemporary, there is a way in which books are dated, but practically speaking, with most writers and our short-term ways of thinking, they are not dated any way that you think, so don't neglect your backlist.
Yeah, and actually I have 2 on my list that can just immediately go into that. Writing a book is never a finish line. It just isn't. It's something that you've done. Now go write another book. Go figure out a way to get people to read that book. Or if you think that writing a book is it, you're done. That's great, but you're not in the writing publishing business. It's a total hobby, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. But if you're in this as a business, you cannot think of writing a book as a finish line. It's the starting gate for a lot of other stuff you got to do. And readers don't give a shit about traditional versus indie at all. They want a quality product. They want a good experience. They want error-free copy. They want an attractive cover. They want a product description that makes sense. They want to feel like there's no difference between the book they bought at Target and the book they downloaded, from you on their Kindle. So that's the important distinction. It's not indie traditional. The average reader does not care about what we think or what's going on with our industry at all. They just want to be entertained.
The one thing that we've run up against a bunch of times is the balance between commercial and art. And this is something that, the jaded artists will say that going commercial is selling out. And the commercial people will say that being a pure artist is just kind of putting your head in the sand and not caring whether you sell books. It seems like the truest way to handle this is to have a balance of both, or to kind of choose your one for you, one for them. If you're an artist, is sort of a model that we've embraced. So we have books that we put a lot of time and care into that we know might not necessarily sell very well, but they're counterbalanced by our more commercial stories. That said, our more commercial stories, like Invasion series, which is a 7-book series that did really, really well at launch and continues to do pretty well. It's very much our voice. It is not as commercial as it could be by any means, and that's because we fused those two. But it is it's called Invasion. It's an alien invasion, which is a very popular subgenre. It's, the sequel is called Contact. The third one's called Colonization. Like these are things that people are kind of searching for and want to read about. But our catalog is balanced, and the individual books are balanced too. It's neither a true sellout nor a true like precious art piece.
Right. And that served neither master. So that's important to figure out too. Sometimes compromise is just weak, and you really should decide which way you're going. Are you selling out or are you not? And then just do it right. We have another example. Johnny and I every year decide that we want to write some literary book. And we've always said we don't care how well that book sells. It really is designed to push us as authors and as artists as far as we could possibly go. And this year, it's the book I've mentioned a couple of times, actually. The one that we're working on right now is that book. But this time, we didn't want to say we don't care how much we're selling. We wanted it to push us as hard as possible. And by far, it's the most complicated book we've ever done. It was our most complicated outline. Johnny, it was the hardest to write, right?
Yes, depending on the definition. But yes, it was very technical.
But we also want this book to sell. This is a literary book, and we don't really care if it sells. This is our literary book, and we are putting everything that we've learned about commercial sensibilities into this book so that it has its best odds at all. The last thing I have on my list, because I know we're at time, is collaboration is the most important element in the process. And I left that for last because I think we could do a whole show on that. It's more than just a line. I mean, we found that the industry has changed so much that when we were first doing this a few years ago, you really could be a solopreneur and just kind of figure it out all yourself. But like to that last point where a reader doesn't care about indie versus traditional, they just want a quality product. It is getting harder and harder to get that experience as a solopreneur and, keep up with it. So if you can collaborate, even if it's not with other authors or artists, but other vendors and editors and all of that, that's how you really do this. But again, that's a really deep topic.
The last one that I will mention is, it actually contradicts it doesn't contradict, it plays with something that Sean mentioned early on. And that is, within reason, I would say kind of ignore sales and stats and reviews. And this is me counterbalancing for the way that most authors behave. So yes, you should pay attention to your reviews to see if you are turning a blind eye to things that need to be fixed. And yes, you should pay attention to your sales and your stats so that you can decide what to do with your next book. But most people obsess on them. And it's the sort of thing where you keep a dashboard open, you refresh every day. And oh no, today's sales were 10% lower than yesterday's. The sky is falling. You can obsess in that minutia, and you can obsess over reviews that you would be inclined to take personally, which is actually another topic. You are not your art, meaning that you shouldn't take your reviews personally. But that sort of myopic attention to those things will rob you of the creative energy to create. It's kind of like writing with the door open. You're writing with, the failure of my last book, or boy, that last book really got really great reviews. I'd better write more of this character, even though it doesn't seem to fit. So you need to kind of protect your space and don't obsess over all that little stuff. So, with that said, we'll close this episode of the Story Studio podcast. On the next episode, we're going to do something kind of fun. I'm not going to tell you what it is. No, I will tell you what it is. It's just going to be fun. We're going to just in the interest of, because a lot of people remember on this show, we're not just talking indie publishing. That's what we used to do. It's a component of what we do, but not the whole thing. We're talking about story, but to make sure that everybody is on the same page as to kind of the vocabulary of story and like what this story means in practical sense, whether you're doing it for yourself or your brand or your business. We thought it would be cool to break down an episode of a popular story franchise and just talk about what makes it good. In our opinion, it is good. And that we're going to do the first episode of Breaking Bad. So if you're a listener and you want to watch that before we get to it, then go ahead. That'd be good homework.
It's like Oprah's book club.
Right.
That's exactly
Oprah's book club with Matt.
Try to watch it. It's on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, you can watch it without paying for it. And yeah, I think it's worth watching it because it's really, really good. And even if you've seen it, it's been a while.
And if you haven't seen it, just set aside the next 2 weeks of your life because they're gone.
That's very true. This will be fun. I can actually, probably my family will want to watch that pilot again.
So thanks a lot for listening to I almost did it. Thanks for listening to this.
I was just going to ask you at the beginning, how soon until you think you do that?
The Story Studio Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Story Studio Podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Story Studio Podcast. Are you wondering what the ever-growing demand for superb storytelling skills means for your future? Check out our latest interview as Johnny and Sean dive deep into that question in Storytelling is the Future, How to Build on Your Self-Publishing Success. Download the interview from the info box or show notes in YouTube, or head over to sterlingandstone.net/future.